Whew. Hello, everybody. Hopefully people can see this. Awesome. Looks like people are starting to trickle in. Hello, hello. Thank you very much for coming. Pleasure to meet everyone. Thank you very much. And there is Jamiel. Amazing.
Hey guys.
Awesome. I'm gonna give it another like 10 seconds. Send one quick follow-up. Awesome.
Hi Janine.
So I think we're all good. We can probably just get started. Let me send one quick thing. All right, great. So, hello everyone. Thank you all for joining. My name is David Awad. I assure you this will be fun. We're going to take some time to sit down with Jamiel Sheikh, the CEO of Chainhaus. We're going to talk about his book, Mastering Corda for Developers. And we'll dig into some of the details, how it's been received, any insights from Jamiel. And if you're a developer, you're more than welcome to come and share anything in the chat. Feel free to say hello. And yeah, I think that's basically all the pretense I need there. If you're interested in the book or you want to ask any questions throughout this, feel free to share. And just for a little bit more background, like I said earlier, my guest today is Jamiel Sheikh, founder of the CBDC think tank, an adjunct professor at, I understand it, Columbia Business School, NYU, City University of New York, a mentor for a couple education programs, Lighthouse Labs, and some others. Jamiel originally got his bachelor's in finance from Baruch College, went to Columbia for his MBA, and then he got his master's in computer science from Georgia Tech, just like I did, which is very cool. So yeah, that I think is the whole bio. You do a lot.
Yeah, it's having fun. Yeah, it's maybe a little bit of ADD, but yeah, it's a lot of fun. Each thing that I work on helps the other thing that I work on. So there's kind of a synergy. So yeah.
Yeah. So so what are you working on? What have you been excited about lately, Corda or otherwise, in the blockchain space?
I'm really excited about, I would say DeFi is what really is really interesting for me right now. Regardless of what blockchain we're talking about, I think it's very exciting. So I've been doing some presentations and I'm writing a book on DeFi right now for a major business publisher. And that book is really targeting, it's not a technical book, it's targeting business readers or the casual layman who wants to understand DeFi,
Right.
like liquidity pools and things like that. But and it also weaves in a lot of the stories that are behind the scenes around how DeFi is emerging, the key people, some of the key protocols like Compound and Uniswap, and all of that. So that I'm working on that. Hopefully that book will be out later in the year, September, October timeframe. I'm running the CBDC think tank. We're about to launch, I think today, actually it'll be today, some workshops with some central banks that we're going to be doing. Yeah, and we do education, we do development services, and we are building two products. One is in the DeFi space, which is kind of a DeFi tracker, and then also another one which is called Disperse, which is disbursement management or grant management.
Why didn't you music call?
I think that was Janine. So let me ask you this: what made you want to start? What made you want to start with writing the book on Corda?
Well, so I had a desk at R3 in New York City, and I got to meet pretty much everybody in the New York City office.
Right.
And that interaction was really exciting. So I learned a lot about Corda. At that time, this was maybe 2019 or early 2020, 2019. A lot of the docs were not really, I would say, friendly, reading friendly. They were not really easy to read. It assumed a lot of knowledge. And I thought there would be a need for a book to bridge between somebody who's completely new to blockchain, never mind new to Corda, but just somebody who's just very new to DLTs, and they wanted to learn how to kind of get into the space, how to change their careers. Let's say they're a Java developer or a Kotlin developer, and they wanted to come in and say, well, I want to get into the blockchain space, but I don't want to learn a new language. I want to work with Java that I already know. I think there was a whole market full of individuals and developers that wanted to kind of leverage their current skill set. And
Right.
there's a large number of Java developers globally, and so I decided to write that book. And also it was like a great way for me to test my knowledge and my understanding of Corda, because every time I had to write something, I had to make sure it was accurate. And it allowed me to kind of like, actually not allowed me, to force me to dig into the Corda source code
Right.
and try to understand like how some things worked underneath the hood. And that was a great experience. So in the process of writing, even though the writing is painful, it's painful to
Yeah.
write. And it was like about it was only, actually the book was originally around 600 pages. And the publisher O'Reilly kind of asked me to trim it down. So now it's about 500 pages.
Interesting. What was the content you chose to trim out?
It was Corda Settler stuff, and some Corda Enterprise stuff. So it was about, I think, as I recall, about 2 chapters. And then some of the other chapters kind of removed some diagrams and things like that, screenshots. Mostly screenshots we got rid of in terms of the graphics. But yeah, that was the kind of the process. It took about 2 years to write, I would say, but most of the writing was like 6 months before the publication. Because the first year I was just goofing around with Corda. I'm like, oh, what is this? What's that? And let me write a paragraph here, and so a paragraph there. And I wrote maybe 200 pages, and then I rewrote the whole thing again 6 months before publication.
Wow.
Because I felt like whatever I wrote was garbage, and I had to rewrite it. And so then I just rewrote the whole thing. And that was an intense period. Actually, I was writing it while I had COVID. I was in a bad shape with COVID. And like my publisher was like, oh, you got deadlines. And so I kept
Oh my
writing.
gosh.
Yeah, I kept writing like March, April, I was writing. Even like March, I couldn't get out of bed. April was okay. It was lethargic, but most of the writing was May, June, July, August, and then around September, October, it went into production, and then I was out in November.
I got a question from Mo Abul Maali. Hopefully I got that right. He says, quote, I want to know if transitioning from Solidity to Corda with Kotlin smart contracts, what is that like? Is there enough resources, and your general thoughts?
Yeah, so I do both Solidity and Corda. I'm developer for both. I don't have as much time as I used to for coding because I'm running a business. Both are like, they're like different tools for different things, for different use cases. They're not the so like, it's not that you should let go of one and move to the other. I wouldn't call it a transition. I would call it really becoming more seasoned around blockchain if you include in your skill set understanding of Corda, because there's some use cases where Solidity, when we say Solidity, we really mean Ethereum. Ethereum don't make sense as a solution, and in some cases it's the other way around, right? So depending on your use case, then it's like saying, well, should I get rid of my SQL skills and transition to no SQL? Well, you get different benefits, pros and cons for each. Or should I get rid of my Windows NT server skills and go to Linux? Maybe you can have both. So Corda is something that's great for, and has really better transaction rate than Ethereum. And so for those cases where privacy is really a big deal, and being able to trade without leaving any residual data or residual meta on the blockchain that is observable by anybody or everybody. If that's kind of a use case you want to, like, you're building out, then obviously then Ethereum may not be the right option for you at that point. And then using something like Corda would be a better option. But Solidity is based on C++ kind of concepts. And so is Java. So I think the transition, if you wanted to call it a transition, going from Solidity to Corda, um, from a syntax point of view, won't be difficult. But from an architecture point of view, it's very different. In Solidity and Ethereum, you can code and you deploy, and there's no real concern regarding infrastructure. But with Corda, you have to build out some potential infrastructure. You need to run nodes and things like that.
For sure.
That's because the node operator owns the data, right? And so you're not giving up the data. And so there's pros and cons to that, and that depends on your use case, right? So if your use case is that we want to make sure we own the data and we want privacy around the data, but we do want to transact, then Corda is the solution for that.
I got a question from Lazar. Are you planning on writing a second book for Corda, and how do you think it develops? He says, thanks.
Sure. There may be a second edition. I just won't do it right this year. If I do a second edition, it'll be next year. It would evolve. It would include more Corda Enterprise, the basics of Corda Enterprise. It was a chapter. It was reduced down to like 2 paragraphs in chapter 1 or 2, I forget. But this year I'm focusing on a DeFi book. That will be about 250 pages. It's a major business publisher, and I think that book is going to be the first book on DeFi in the market. There's a couple other books in the DeFi, but they're not that great. Like, for example, I got this book here. It's called the DeFi Handbook, but it's $70. But if you go through it, it's all screenshots. It's just literally page after page, right? And so there isn't really good information on DeFi. So I'm going to get that book out this year, and then next year look at possibly doing a second edition on Corda.
Yeah, it's kind of hard because DeFi is changing so fast. By the time you get the book out, it's not going to be relevant. Like, I think 1inch just came out and kind of undermined Uniswap's whole thing, and it's really interesting to see that competition playing out. But yeah, that's a hard task.
Well, there are some timeless truths about DeFi. There are some things that are always going to be true. Like, for example, the concept of liquidity, right? And what does liquidity mean? What is the idea of staking? So DeFi protocols will change. Actually was this morning on a call with a VC firm that actually invested in 1inch and Uniswap. The fund manager, we spoke about for 2 hours. The space is changing and evolving, but some of the underlying concepts are not really changing, like automated market making and all that is not really changing.
Yeah.
Algorithms will change, but understanding kind of the framework, because it's complex, is the goal. And then there's some timeless truths and universal truths in DeFi that will exist. And specific protocols will come and go, but those timeless truths will stay. And the goal is to like write a book that I can update every year, every 2 years, to make it current, but get the knowledge out.
Very cool. What's the reception been? Have you gotten a lot of feedback from developers, or anyone reached out to you?
For the Mastering Corda? Yeah, it was, if you look at the Amazon.com rating, we got some good ratings. It's been 5 stars. A lot of the developers that reached out to me started turning me into help desk. Like, I can't figure this out, this bug, that bug.
Right. Yep.
I couldn't I couldn't support that. But it has been very positive. I think the book fills a certain gap between the docs that you have online, and then the ability to like go through a book from the beginning to end and then fully kind of understand a lot of the fundamentals and basics of Corda. The approach that I took is because I taught Corda many times. I did a lot of like classes in person before COVID. It was all these in-person classes that I delivered, and kind of got all this kind of like feedback from people around what their issues were in terms of learning Corda. Also, when I first learned Corda, I remember I took a 2-day course, and I walked out of that 2-day course like, I don't understand any of this. And I needed to kind of dig into it myself to kind of internalize it. And so the pains that I suffered through, like in my learning, I try to make sure that people that learned through my book didn't have the same pains, that they kind of like went through it. And so a lot of the questions I would get during my classes, I captured those questions and then incorporated the answers in the book so that those questions would not emerge, or they'd be less frequent.
Yeah, this is actually something I was curious to ask you about. So in the table of contents, right? Chapter 1 is kind of business fundamentals, 2 is on the crypto, 3 is the first contract, and we don't end up getting the states until like chapter 6, I think it is. So I'm curious, like, what was the thought process for how to structure this? Because it goes crypto, then your first contract, then blockchain fundamentals. So I'm curious, like, is that how you found was most effective to teach people, or what was the?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It was a difficult decision, right?
Right.
One is there was two in the publisher with the publisher. There were two camps. One was like give the developer the hello world immediately, and there was another camp that basically said that you need to start with a high level and then go down into the specifics. So one of the purposes of the book is to get it to in the hands of business users who are not developers, who can read the first few chapters and start to get an appreciation for what Corda is. It's almost like a sales tool. It became like a sales tool. They say, hey, here's why you would use Corda, and that became a priority. The cryptography chapter, I didn't want to write another crypto thing, but what's unique about the cryptography chapter is it ties it to specific classes that are in Corda that use cryptography, like secure hash and things like that. I thought people should understand those fundamentals, how Merkle trees were used in transactions, and get a grip on that before they went into the other things. But moving between chapters, you can start with whatever chapter you wanted. With chapter 3, I didn't do states. I wanted people to see nodes interacting with flows, so they can get the big picture first. Like, okay, so this is communicating with this, and because what really matters is flows and states, and everything else, like contracts. Those are kind of supporting things, right? They're important, they're critical, but it's flows and states that really, really matter. And then I did basically a chapter on states and breaking down the concept of a state. Like those people that are in the blockchain space tend to forget how little people that are outside the blockchain space, how little exposure they have to blockchain. And just saying states will not necessarily make them understand what it is, right? So kind of prepared them. And then there were some people who never did anything with blockchain, don't even understand what blockchain is. So that's why I put in a chapter, I think that was chapter 4 on blockchain fundamentals. But obviously the way I wrote it is that you could jump around. And if you wanted to get hands-on immediately, then chapter 3 is where you would start, and then kind of progress from there.
For sure. Yeah, it makes sense. You kind of alluded to this in a little bit when you said that. So I guess you think of contracts as not being as useful. Do you find it's better to put that kind of verification at the flow level?
No, it's not that. I didn't say that they're not useful. I just said that they're not a priority in terms of the learning process.
Right.
So in learning, like when you're learning, understanding flows and states are probably the first things that you should be comfortable with. And then you add in like commands and contracts, because they harden the ability of what a flow, a business execution can do, right? They solidify and crystallize, right? These validation rules are crystallizing. And so you don't want to get into the details of how to crystallize something at the expense of understanding the overall bigger picture. The bigger picture is what flows modify states. States are what are on ledger, and the interaction between the two is the first thing you should get comfortable with. And then getting into the details of making sure the state change and state transition is in accordance to validation rules is more detailed. It's more specific commands and things like that. And that approach was different from the 2-day course. The 2-day course was flow, states, contracts, immediately commands, and then flows almost came later. And I took the opposite approach, which is my thesis. My thinking is that people want to see the big picture interacting, working, the different nodes working together. They're running it, they're spinning the nodes, and it's like, oh, I can see the nodes interacting. And then I can start putting stuff on the ledger, and then I can start tightening the states and like what the states can do and the flows can do based on using commands and contracts.
Right. Abjit asks, I think you talked about this a little bit, but I'll let you decide if you want to take it. Was there a reason why you chose to not start with a simple example and let it evolve as you go through the different topics?
Yeah, I mean, we started off with a simple example in chapter 3, and then the next chapter goes into, we build a specific app throughout the book, basically a to-do management app, or is effectively a business processes management app. So we start with that with chapter 3, kind of the hello world in chapter 3. The problem with DLTs and blockchain is that to understand topic A, you need to understand topic B. And to understand topic B, you need to understand topic A. Right?
Yep.
It's kind of this cyclical thing. And to like kind of break that, you have to start somewhere, and then it evolves and iteratively grows. And that's kind of the difficulty in writing. The approach was to start with a simple example. And chapter 3, you're doing a one-off example. And then when you get into chapter 5 and 6, then you're incrementally building a more complex app. It's across multiple chapters that the app is developed. Then you get into tokens, right? And tokens is a big field, right? It's a big, it's growing. Like, what is tokens? What are tokens? How can I use tokens? What's fungible? What's non-fungible? What are the token SDK? When do I use it? When do I not use it? Should I roll out my own token framework? And so there are all these big topics, payments and settlement and all that. So it grows more complex over the chapters. And as you follow the book, my goal was to give you depth in understanding every line of code, why you would do that code, what's the reason for that, what is the underlying impact, where in the Corda source code is what's executing and where. So you kind of go under the hood. And then once you understand under the hood how it's all working, then you can basically build any app after that, right? Once you have that tool set, you can just like become very natural at building a Corda app.
For sure. Quick logistical note for the audience, because I am obligated to refer you to our survey. I left the link to that survey in the chat, so please do take a look at that. This one's more of a curveball for you, but what do you think separates, you can choose to make this Corda relevant if you like, but what do you think separates a good developer from a great developer?
That's a good question. I think aside from technical skills, obviously, if you got, the technical skills that are better than somebody else, then you're a better coder. But I think a better developer has better soft skills, the ability to communicate with the business, communicate with other team members, and help move things forward is what makes a good developer a great developer. The ability to kind of take business requirements and influence those business requirements, and not get caught up in the weeds or get the kind of glazed eyes when they're talking to a business person with their technical stuff, and the ability to translate a lot of the technical details in simple ways for the business to understand. So in the case of DLTs in Corda and blockchain in general, there's a huge gap between the general business people that are out there and the technical people that understand the detail. A lot of business people still struggle with the idea of decentralized. What does that even mean? And why should I even care? And be able to like elucidate the value proposition of a specific use case or a specific solution or a specific platform is very, very important. I think that's what differentiates a good developer with a great developer, because at the end of the day, development is becoming a commodity skill. You can buy that on the market, but what is harder to buy is the ability to kind of have that kind of relationship with the business side. And that's where those developers typically excel and move forward faster. Knowing the exact syntax of a specific thing is great, but you will only go so far if you can't explain or absorb or interact with the business side. And I think that soft skill is what differentiates, obviously, of somebody who's been doing Corda for 3 years versus somebody who just started 2 months ago. There is no comparison, but apples to apples comparison, like all things holding constant, a developer with the soft skills is going to kind of accelerate and provide value to the business and organization more than a technically really savvy guy, but that can't really communicate.
Sure. I have two questions for you. It looks like they're kind of asking a similar thing from Kareem and Mohammed. Kareem says, a lot of respect for Professor Jamiel. How effective is Corda now, and is it growing? Mohammed asks a similar question. Opinion on job growth / demand for Corda in the near future. I'm curious also if you've found that in classes, either pre and post COVID, if there's been a shift there for classes and what you see for the landscape in the future.
So I don't have a pulse on the job market per se, but I think there is as we see in the market, there is significant uptick around blockchain and cryptos. Cryptos is moving into basically the mainstream now. You know, you just walk down the street and you'll see a kid on the phone buying Dogecoin, right? And so that kind of like movement towards mainstream conscious is has occurred, and it may be like one of the silver linings of COVID, that COVID because it's made people stay home, and so they're looking at more digital things. They're looking at, oh well, what's Ethereum and what's Corda and what's this and what's that, and let me just pick up $500 worth of this and $100 worth of that, and so there's all this trading activity that's occurring. So I think the job market overall for blockchain is at its early stage, and it will grow significantly and phenomenally. There is more demand than there is supply. I know on from the Corda side, we get queries all the time for Corda, and we can't fully support our staff at all. There's kind of a spillover effect. So we're a little bit more picky and choosy what projects we engage. So I think a blockchain in general is going to continue to grow. We do see strong demand for Corda, but I don't run an HR website or a recruiting website, so I don't have the hard data, but it's just kind of a sense in the market that these things are going to continue to grow, and they're going to continue to become more and more complex. And that complexity, if you can manage and handle and understand that complexity, would be very valuable, meaning your salaries will be higher.
Right, for sure. Do you find the blockchain and distributed systems communities talking a lot? It seems like it'd be a natural fit, but I haven't seen a lot of that communication happening. I'm curious if you've like interacted with a lot of distributed systems people.
You're talking about just generic distributed systems people, or?
I guess I'm inclined to think that maybe the world of the containerization world and the Kubernetes world would be really tightly integrated with people who are working on things like blockchain.
Right.
And yet I don't see the kinds of collaborations I would expect.
Yeah. You know, like DevOps stuff, I think it's still in its early stages in the blockchain market. You know, DevOps with blockchain is far more complex than doing DevOps on just the cloud, right?
Right.
Cloud facilitates so much, right? And if you're using these tools like Docker and Kubernetes, yeah, and all you're doing is cloud stuff and web apps and backend, then that's almost mature, even though I don't think it's fully mature. Blockchain still is wanting in that space. It's still a significant gap. It's hard, right? DevOps with blockchain is hard, and that's a good thing for if you want to have a career in that space. It's complex, right? Running nodes and HA and you know, like all that kind of stuff, and getting all that stuff going in the DevOps world, even in a production support, even that production environment, their production support is very complex. Managing certificates, managing, you know, all kinds of things. It's far more complex than saying I'm going to go manage a cluster of databases. So yeah, I think your point is well taken, David. Is that they aren't talking as much as they should be, which is ironic because that's what the purpose of DevOps is
Right.
to bridge that gap between production support and developers.
Very cool. Yeah. One other question I've got for you, because I know we're past the 3. So you've taught a lot of developers who are trying to learn these kinds of concepts for the first time. What is the thing that people most often miss, right? When they're first learning this, what is the concept that people have the most trouble with? I'm with you that there is this kind of circular dependency, and there's a couple of them in this space. Do you find like there's a particular concept people just have the hardest time learning first go around?
Uh, with Corda or in blockchain in general?
Whichever sticks out to your mind, but I suppose the Corda.
Yeah. I think, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that when I teach it takes a little bit of time for people to get used to. For example, I think the hardest thing that people, especially developers, is this purist view around decentralization, right? And they're expecting when they go through Corda, they expect pure decentralization, and they don't see it, they get potentially violent. I mean, I've get people get angry, but that anger is really not justified because there is no such thing really today as a purely decentralized system, right? Ethereum is not purely decentralized. Bitcoin is basically just a couple of hardcore miners, China, in China, uh, there's maybe 5 or 6 um, minor pools that are controlling Bitcoin and things like that. The nature and idea of what it means to be decentralized is difficult because there's a lot of philosophy behind it. There are political ideas around. I was talking to a hedge fund manager who was born in the Czechoslovakia and remembers, which today the Czech Republic remembers communism and associates centralization with communism, right? And so, us for me in New York, I don't associate centralization with communism. I associate it with the extraction of rent from the participants of a platform, the extraction of value by the centralized authority from the participants in a platform. And there is degrees of centralization and decentralization. I don't think there is software in the market right now that is widely used that isn't somewhat centralized. It's kind of a shades of gray. And explaining that to a lot of people gets a little bit difficult because they bring in their biases and their political perspectives and their idea around what decentralization is, and explaining them that technology is a bunch of trade-offs, and you use specific technologies to move certain use cases forward. And if it doesn't move your use case forward, then don't use it. If it moves your use case forward, it moves human civilization forward, then you want to employ that technology, and the technology is valuable. It may not fit with your political agenda or your political vision or how you believe the world should work, but if it moves use cases forward, then that's all that matters, and that's valuable. So that I find is the most difficult part. I think people are getting more comfortable with the idea of like things are not fully decentralized in any space right now,
Right.
and Corda is decentralized in a different way than, let's say, how Ethereum may be
Right.
decentralized.
Yeah, that really is the key question. And it might be a big one, but I promise it's my last one for you. Where do you see this going in the long term? Because we have now this paradigm of decentralized or quote unquote decentralized blockchains where you can run your smart contracts in these distributed environments. You don't have to worry about infrastructure, et cetera. And there are certain kinds of institutions that can use those, but there are other institutions that can't. And so where do you see permissioned blockchains fitting into the new world is, I guess, my question for you, or how that evolves over the next kind of 10 years or so.
I think the permission blockchains will have to evolve into public blockchains. I think we will see that evolution in the coming years, and the concept of public and private will blur, right? It's going to mesh, kind of like we use the public internet. But when you log into your email, it's not a public service. It's not that anybody can log into your inbox. And you go into a company, you log into a company via VPN or something like that. You've got these private networks, and but underneath it is public infrastructure. So that's a blurring, right? So there's a blur between public and private, when the internet first started, it was all public, right? And then layered on top of that was what's called portals and these corporate portals where you log in and you logged in and you got into your company web services, and it was limited, it was permissioned. So permissioned and public permissioned is viable when you go to the library and you take your library card and you borrow books. That is a permission system, but it's a public service, right? And so there's going to be that kind of blurring. So the public market is moving towards that direction from one side, and the permission market is moving towards that direction in the other side. The question is who's going to get there first and who's going to become dominant. I think we'll see that in a few years, but I think the permission world will have to become a little bit more open, and the public market needs to do the public blockchains need a better way to do, let's say, KYC and handle privacy. You know, if I do a transaction, I don't want anybody to know how much money I spent on this credit default swap that I just bought.
Right.
And so how do I do that? If I can't do that on a public chain, then I'm not going to do that at all.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah, super interesting. I feel like I have a million questions I could ask you down that rabbit hole. But I know we don't have too much time here. So I know you had some stuff you wanted to share about Chainhaus, or any pluggables you want to share?
Nothing specific. Obviously, if anybody needs help with any Corda stuff, please hit us up.
Sure. Yeah, sounds great. And that is chainhaus.com. Chainhaus.com. People can find you. And yeah, please do feel free, if you're interested in content like this, or you want to reach Jamiel, find him at chainhaus.com. You can contact us at devrel@r3.com. And if you have ideas for things you want to throw at Jamiel, or improvements for training or anything else, by all means, feel free to find me, david.awad@r3.com. And please do fill out our survey. That is on research.net/r/mastering Corda. And that is in the chat. I don't know if you're open to take more questions, but
I got to get going.
Sounds good. All
Yeah.
right. Thank you very much, Jamiel. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Sounds good.
Good.
Awesome. Thank you very much, everybody. Hopefully people can start trickling out, and I will close this out.